Okay, so now that the heat is here, in every sense of the word, so I would like to invite for our next session, Adam Fried. Adam Fried is a partner, where is he? I cannot see Adam. Hey. Adam is a partner at GSV. Adam has led very significant technological companies that really has changed dramatically the edtech market. But I would like to say something. I met Adam, I knew about Adam, GSV, we met in Zoom, but we met personally, in person, the other day, and I found out something that for me is more important than anything that you have in your CV. Adam is a person with a curiosity and an empathy for the diversity of the world that I've seen very few times. So thank you so much for being with us, and he's gonna share the amazing, actually it's funny because you are like that, actually Avi and I thought, and you were chairing a panel that exactly is gonna talk about the value of what we talk about all the time, connecting, being global. So I'm sure now that you are the perfect person to chair that. Thank you so much, Adam.
Thanks, Celia. No pressure, right? Shalom lekulam, boker tov, assalamu alaikum, merhaba. It's wonderful to see everybody here. The last time I was in Tel Aviv was, I'm going to admit something embarrassing. The last time I was in Tel Aviv was for Eurovision. I came here for it. I saw Madonna, and our panel's going to work harder than Madonna did, okay? So I know it's a busy day. There's a lot going on. First of all, I got a notification that WhatsApp is down right now. I didn't do that on purpose to make you pay attention, but don't panic if your WhatsApp's not working. It's great to be here today and to be a part of this panel. I have a couple of questions I wanted to see if I could ask you. By the way, I'm going to keep my notes on my phone. I'm not looking for WhatsApp. Okay, so don't message me on WhatsApp. It's not working, first of all. Secondly, I won't respond. I'm with the panel. First of all, does everyone want to just stretch a little bit? Do you want to stand up and stretch your arms a little bit? Okay, just stand up, stretch it out. There's so much. We have such great stuff going on, and it's a lot of sitting time. All right, so while you're standing, I have a couple questions. So who here has in your life a child who's really important in your life? Could be your own child, could be another child, right? למי כאן יש ילד שמאוד חושב בחיה שלך או שלך? Okay, so everybody, right? All right, so I have a follow-up question. Who here thinks that that child is getting the education they really need? Why is it laughter? It's a real question. Okay, one person. Tell us what you're doing later. And I have one more question. Who here is a teacher? Who here is a teacher? Anyone a teacher or a professional educator? Mora, more? Okay, first of all, thank you. Thank you. You can sit whenever you want, or you can stand for me the whole time. I'm going to feel so good. We're going to take a picture, and people are going to think I'm great, but it's just you stretching. There was a statistic that I first heard about 10 years ago in America, which was that 80% of people, of parents, felt that the educational system was not working for their children. 80% of parents thought their own child's teacher was amazing. So we have gaps to close and a real opportunity. COVID accelerated so much of the trend lines that we already saw. And we're going to put together a panel to talk about education and how it can be relevant in a global context and in a local context. So I want to introduce my wonderful panel who's going to join me. And we're going to do, by the way, the similar format. So two of our panelists are going to give a talk, and then we're going to have what's called a rebound. We'll have a follow-up conversation. So first of all, let me introduce Dr. Tali Yariv-Marshall. She's the director. Where's Tali? Come on up, come on up. She is the director of the Baracha Foundation, chair of the Israel Forum of Foundations, and a lecturer at Hebrew University. I will let her tell you more about the work that she's doing. Welcome. Dr. Christine Laguerre. Did I pronounce it right, your last name? Thumbs up? Oh, good. She is a professor of psychology at the University of Texas at Austin and the founder of the Center for Applied Cognitive Science there. And she's going to talk about the incredible research she's doing with students and learning. We also have two more amazing panelists. Joycey John, who's joining us. There's Joycey, good morning. She is the Strategy and Transformation Director at Trinity College London, which is, by the way, an international exam board. It's not Trinity College at Oxford, but Trinity College London, which is an exam board. There's a lot of really interesting stuff that's happening right now in the world of exams. How do we create exams for students that are relevant, that meet them where they are? And when we think about portability of credentials and everything that's happening in that world that Timothy talked about, really interesting to think about how exams play into this conversation. And also Shirley Rimon. Shirley, hi. The Tel Avivis know who she is. She is the Director of Education Administration of the Municipality of Tel Aviv-Yafo. And she's there in that education system. There are 100,000 students from ages 0 to 18 studying in 130 schools and 600 kindergartens. And of course, Tel Aviv is a very diverse, multi-ethnic, multilinguistic, multicultural city. So lots of exciting stuff to do there. So I'm gonna start now. We're gonna sit up here and enjoy the first talk. We're gonna invite Tali to come up and share a bit about her work. Tali.
Thank you. Good morning. I want to first start by thanking the first panel, which really brought everything that I want to talk about to the central stage, and mainly issues of what is it that we want to teach? What is it that we want our students to know? And only then ask, how can we do it best? And how can technology help us do it? And coming from really the standpoint that Yuli presented in the first panel, saying, really putting it on the table, we are in deep trouble. As in Israel, we're in deep trouble. All over the world, we're in deep trouble in looking at people and rights and asking, asking about identity and what it means to us and where we want to be in the world. And only from that, then taking the next leap to ask what can and how can technology help us do it. So I started the talk by, just asking, what is it when we talk, what is education when we talk about education? And, first I thought that I was the only one that went through this experience of understanding how I learn and what is important for me. I was the only one that thought that I learn best from experience. I thought I was the only one that learns best when I'm interested in what I'm learning, when it touches me personally. I thought I was the only one that has various ways of learning. Sometimes I'm interested in learning through music, and at other times I'm interested in going outdoors. And most of the time I can't sit still, and all of that, those things. For many years I thought probably I'm the only one. The rest of the world really knows how to learn. And then I met Avi, and everything fell in place, right? But so that's where I want to begin, and then ask, what do we want? What do we really want our students to learn? And how can we help them obtain that knowledge? So in a way, what I want to argue today is that our challenges are not new. We know pretty much what we need to know about the challenges of education, the challenges of learning. I will look at things that we've always known, probably say nothing new, but I will try from that perspective to look at those same challenges that we've always dealt with from a different perspective. A perspective that in a way is much more acute, I think, today. You said, Shizaf said before, the end of history, the beginning of a place that we think is global, but is very, very local, at a place where really, as so many people said in the first panel, is that tipping point of time and space that really brings up these challenges from a different perspective. And then I'll try to integrate all that, and ask what can we do as educators, what can we do as policymakers, and only at the end we'll then ask, can we, and what can we do from the perspective of technology? So what do we know? We know, as we've known from 1942, and probably before, that schools teach the world of yesterday. We come with the knowledge that we already have. But we know that our students learn for tomorrow. We know today that tomorrow will be different, and then the day after tomorrow will be even more different and even more challenging. And we know that to be able to go through this whole process of change and continual change, we want our students to continue to learn. We want to continue to research. We want to be able to adapt to the changes. I want to bring another point into the discussion, and that is the fact that we also know, and also Yuli touched that before, and in relating to Arizona State University, we know that what we choose to learn, what we choose to teach, what we choose to research has an impact on the here and now, and will have an impact on our children's future. So it's not about how they learn, it's not about, or it is also about how they learn. It is also about who our students are and who are we addressing. And it is also about our choice as educators, as policymakers, and as technology developers. It is our choice of what we choose to teach and what we choose to research, and how that will find its place into the global world. So how can we begin to think about the how, the what, the who in schools, and how does this thought, these thoughts impact the practice of what it looks like in schools? And as I said, nothing new. Freud told us in 1923 that it all begins from the self. It begins from our ability to see ourselves, to reflect at ourselves, to understand ourselves, and only through that will we be able to then see others, reflect on others, be in communication with others. I find it quite amazing that, we talk so much about, social learning. We talk so much about everything that, our ability to communicate and our need to communicate. We forget that that all starts with our ability to see ourselves, to reflect at ourselves, to understand ourselves, to look in the mirror, and then look at the other. Begin by seeing ourselves. So Freud taught us that. And then Dewey told us that school is a social entity, and that the main activity that happens in schools is a social activity, right? We forgot that. We forgot that school is not only about learning, or definitely that is not the only thing that is happening in schools and that should be happening in schools. Schools is about communicating. It is about identifying with a community. It is about reacting to a community and reflecting a community. And then Dewey also told us in 1938 that it is about experience, that learning is experiencing, that we cannot learn without touching, without going through an experience of trying out, without failing, without trying again, and then that cycle again and again and again. And we know from the beginning of times that poverty has an influence on educational achievements, and that where you were born and who you were born to will have an influence on your ability to achieve in school and then to achieve later in life. And all those ideas are completely not new, right? If not old. They've always been there. The only question that I want to ask is, what do we do with them now? So let's start to rethink what each and every one of these ideas tell us and how we can look at them maybe in a slightly more innovative way. Why did this? There we go. So let's start from the beginning, right? Let's start from the self. And let's ask, what does this reflective activity enable us to do, and how can we do it? That's me using a notebook. That's the self. How can we look at this at the reflective experience and ask, what can we do with it now? How can we provide more opportunities for connection? How can we provide more opportunities of safety in space, especially at a time where, you know, we're all out there. Our identity is completely open. Our by definition of technological identity, right? We cannot hide behind any kind of a curtain. Not a virtual curtain, and definitely not a physical curtain. So what can we do to enable our students and ourselves to reflect, to have the opportunity for safety, for well-being, for health, from really the perspective of the here and now, of the very, very basic idea of the physical here and now. All right, I will also talk about, or try to answer, issues of community and our ability to create that connection with communities in our close environment. And here also, I want to argue that it is about the here and now. We will not be able to react or to find ourselves as global citizens or understand global challenges if we do not start with the here and now, with our community, with the ability to touch the challenges, to see them in the eye, to research them, to ask questions of what can I do to help create kind of a solution to our social disparities, to our ideological disparities, and to our challenges of environment and sustainability. So the here and now is really where we have to begin. And the here and now starts with place, starts with where we are, and with our ability to connect to where we are. It goes on to experience, but it really also enables an experience that is a very open and fluid experience. It's the kind of experience in which we fall and trip and get hurt and learn from that. And that is the kind of experience, that is one of the biggest challenges, I think, for the experiences that the virtual world gives us, right? Or technology gives us. When do we get hurt? When do we physically feel that ability to stand up again and keep going through learning, through asking questions, through creating, researching ourselves, researching our place, researching our very close environment. And the last thing, again, that I will bring to central stage is the issue of disparities. We have to continue to look at the fact that schools are not doing well with children, with students of backgrounds that are more challenging in terms of their social and economic point of beginning. We have to be able to look at these students and families in the eye and say, we're seeing you, we're looking at your challenges specifically, and we have the ability, or at least the will, to be able to respond to those challenges. And unfortunately, I will argue that we're not doing enough of that at all, and that technology is not helping us in that sense. Or not enough. It's not helping us, not because it's not willing to help us, because our ability to look at the individual, to create that connection to his or her time, place, social, and economic situation is limited. And so we will have to open up those abilities of our teachers, our schools, and then use technology to help us do that as we go on in the process. So where does the change begin? What do we have to do in order to change what we're doing? And by the way, Adam knows that I'm not at all arguing that this change is not happening now. I think a lot of it is happening. I think a lot of it is happening thanks to teachers and schools that are doing the work. And you know, I'd like to put that out there also. We'll get back to that. Change begins with policy. Change begins with the fact that we have to understand that teaching and learning cannot be a top-down practice. Teaching and learning happens in schools, and it happens with, Yuli said that, it happens with the abilities of teachers. Teachers are where it all starts, and we have to think of our teacher professional development, of teacher education, of the well-being, of the status of teachers in order to be able to create any kind of change and to relate to any kind of larger challenge for that matter. And I will also argue that we have to rethink the issues of assessments. What do we assess? How do we assess? Who assesses? How can we create a policy, really, that looks at the child, the student, the teacher, from their point of view, from what they are doing, from their practice of teaching and learning? In schools, that's really goes back to ideas that we have known in the past of giving the schools the autonomy to relate to their communities, to relate to their schools, to their students, to relate to their teachers, and using technology for that. Teachers do not need technology to help them tell a good story. That's what they wake up in the morning for. They know how to tell a good story, and if they don't know how to tell a good story, they shouldn't be teachers. Okay, but that's what they wake up for. Teachers need the ability to help their students research, to help their students touch the challenge, to help their students then recap and think again, and then create a new kind of research and a new kind of learning to react. And the last thing that I will look at is really looking really at curriculum from the social emotional aspects, from place-based learning, from centered practices, learner-centered practices, and many more. I'd like to just end, Cecilia here, I promise, this is the last one. If you take anything from this presentation, let's talk about the individual, let's talk about reflective practices of students and teachers. Let's never forget to look at the teachers at the central stage of anything that happens in education. Let's talk about activism as a central theme. Pro-activism of teachers, pro-activism of students is what helps them relate to what we want them to relate to their community, to the people around them, to their challenges and other people's challenges around them. And then really remembering that understanding global responsibility can only come when we begin by understanding our local responsibility and where we are. Look at them in the eye, look at our students, and look at our teachers, and ask them, where do you want to begin? And where do you want this to go? Thank you.
I think I don't have to stand up. That's great. Thank you so much, Tali, Dr. Yariv Mashal. Christine, the floor is yours. Another perspective on creating the global citizen. And can I just say, as Christine walks over there, she traveled here with her baby, who brought so much joy to us at yesterday's event.
Thank you all so much for being here. I was reflecting on the fact that I feel a bit like Alice in Wonderland. Not a couple of days ago, I suppose, like climbed into a mechanical bird and flew across the world into a wonderland, a completely different environment full of possibilities and magic, quite frankly. So what I want to talk to you about today is culture, which is something that I think about all the time. And culture is really the currency that schools operate in. That's what schools were really designed to do. They were designed to create culture, to transmit culture, also to transform culture. So I think about the human mind as a cultural learning system. That's what students are doing. That's really what we're all doing all of the time. And I also want to reflect a little bit on the kind of the human nature aspect of culture and where cultural diversity comes from and how schools interact with this complex system. So first I want to talk to you about an extraordinary young man. His name's, well, he's an adult now, but he was a young man once. His name's Kelvin Doe. He's from Sierra Leone, and he's a self-taught engineer. So at 13, he built a battery based on his own ingenuity that was capable of providing electricity for the community that he's from. And he did this by combining all sorts of different scrap metals and electronic equipment, and he recombined them to create this battery. And there's a lot that's, I think, fascinating about this. In a lot of ways, you could potentially explain how this exceptional young man was able to do this. Clearly, he has a keen intellect, an extraordinary brain, but he also has access to the accumulated innovations of many previous generations. And we have to consider that this is the environment that children are currently living in and learning in. Extraordinarily technologically sophisticated and complex environments that might feel natural to us, but have only been around for a few decades, maybe a few hundred years, maybe generously a few thousand years, right? This is not the context in which human minds have been operating for the entirety of our time on this planet. So the environments children are living and learning in are changing at an exceptionally rapid rate. This impacts how children learn, what they learn, who they learn from. So I think it's worth commenting on this. It's also the capacity to build innovations like this are due to what's called cumulative culture. And cumulative culture is just the ratcheting and the collection of innovations that build over time. Schools are clearly critical to the accumulation of cultural knowledge, and this is the environment that children are living in. Cumulative culture also makes us capable of innovations that any individual would never be able to develop in their own lifetime. So this ratcheting of technologies makes us much more powerful than just our solitary brains. So the speed of technological innovation due to knowledge is made possible due to knowledge systems, literacy, numeracy, the internet, schools more generally, that are designed to transmit and store information. And in a few short years, Kelvin Doe, for example, took this discarded scrap metal that was built by generations, or made possible by generations of people, and modified, redesigned, and recombined it to create a new technology that was very useful for himself, but also to people in his communities. And this is what is known as recombination. Most of innovation, in fact, is recombination. And in doing so, Kelvin created technology that was in fact far more complex than the technologies of our species has developed over the vast majority of human history. So Children like Kelvin are increasingly going to school and having access to these sorts of technologies at sort of unprecedented rates. The consequence of exposure to this kind of information and access, I think, is still relatively poorly documented. We're still, I think, grappling, trying to keep pace with the speed of technological change. And we need to understand much more what the impact of all these different kinds of technologies are for the developing human mind. I've talked a lot about culture. I've used that term. I thought it might be useful to provide a definition. Culture, in a very abstract way, it's just group-typical behaviors that are shared by a community and that fundamentally require social learning and social transmission. Human minds, I think of them as cultural learning systems. That's what human minds are for. That's what we need to learn how to do. This is a picture of my 5-month-old. So I'm having kind of personal and professional foray into minds as cultural learning systems. And the cognitive processes that support learning are certainly universal. So children everywhere learn by imitating. They learn by observing others. They learn through instruction. But the extraordinary thing about the human brain is how flexible and how plastic it is. That this organism here happens to know English, but is just as capable of learning Hebrew or learning any other language in the human repertoire, any knowledge, any skill set, any toolkit. Right? There's no other species with that kind of flexibility and plasticity to learn any sort of information in the repertoire of our species. Right? I think it's worth just sitting and sort of just being dazzled by how powerful our minds are and their ability to learn really anything that they're exposed to. Now, the cognitive capacities that we possess exist to learn from and build upon the innovations of others. So we often, certainly in the case of technology often makes us feel that we know more than we do, because mobile devices allow us to Google any sort of information that we might want. We've, in many ways, have this kind of distributed cognition, in the sense that information in the world also lives in our brains, but it's a more complex relationship than that. But a big part of what learning is about acquiring and constructing and transforming information we got from other people. So schools are transmission systems. That's fundamentally what they are. And they store, they transmit, and they build upon the knowledge and toolkits of previous generations. We wouldn't have cell phones, and I think probably every single person in this room has a cell phone. Right? First of all, this hasn't existed for very long. But it's only possible because we have the infrastructure to accumulate and store and build upon what others are doing. Individual humans cannot independently build most complex technologies. There's not one person on the planet, probably, that could explain top to bottom how a cell phone works. So despite that, that doesn't prevent any of us from effectively interacting with the technology. But we live in a space of what I think of as causal opacity. We all interact with technologies that none of us fully understand functionally from a causal perspective, which is, again, not something that's been true for very long. Innovation at individual and group levels builds upon this accumulation of cultural knowledge. And again, we can only understand recent technology through cumulative culture, which schools and other sorts of cultural institutions like schools make possible. Children have an extraordinary learning repertoire, right? As I mentioned before, they learn through observation, exploration, participation, imitation, instruction. That's true everywhere in the world. My team and I have done research on this for decades all around the world, and children everywhere learn in these ways, in ways that are flexible and powerful. But these learning processes are also very synergistic, right? They work in tandem to produce outcomes. I want to show you a little video clip of these different learning strategies that children are using, and also to remind all of us that learning occurs everywhere. Learning occurs in schools, but is not limited to schools. So this is a video. Play. There we go. So this was filmed in the northern part of the Republic of Congo. Certainly see observation here, obviously imitation. The little guy in the red shirt in the back reminds me of why I always stand in the back of group exercise classes, because I'm pretty sure that's what I look like. And over the course of this very short video, you see this young learner becoming more and more centrally involved in the activity, starting out with a little space and a little distance, but with greater experience and a little bit more confidence becomes kind of a more central part of the activity. I also like this clip because it's a reminder that humans are fundamentally motivated by sociality. What we are interested in is other people. The reason we like technology and digital devices is to connect with people. Schools are powerful because you are with people in the same space, creating that kind of community. All of these different learning processes that I've described vary tremendously in a variety of ways. Yep, the capacity to imitate, learn through observation is universal, but there's critical variation in lots of ways. One is beliefs about learning, right? You ask someone in Tel Aviv how children learn. They might say, well, they learn by actively engaging with others in their environment. In another place, they might say, or they might prioritize things like learning by instruction or learning by watching. These are folk theories or ethno-theories of learning have a big impact in how children are taught and the opportunities they have to learn. Social organization has a profound impact. Socialization practices vary tremendously. The type of knowledge and skills that children need to learn varies tremendously between populations. The kinds of educational institution and practices children have access to, also age, ability, and experience matter a lot. Now, I want you to keep all those sources of variation in mind when we start talking about schools. So, as I mentioned before, schools transmit and transform culture. That's what they're for. I would argue that schools are the most powerful, successful cultural institutions ever in the history of the species, maybe second or equal to religion. Also a very powerful and successful cultural institution, honestly, for many of the same reasons. They create group cohesion, they transmit information, identities, they're very valuable to communities. Schools have evolved to reproduce and transmit representations in the form of knowledge, skills, values, and identities. That's what schools are doing. Thus, the content of what happens in schools varies tremendously between populations. All of children's cognitive capacities are shaped by schools, and most of what we know about schooling occurs in communities like, for example, or countries like Israel, where you have many generations of schooling. In many parts of the world, however, schooling is still a recent introduction, and we still have opportunities to try to understand the impact of what schools do when they are introduced. So the cultural, the linguistic, the educational technologies, practices, and institutions shape the development of human minds, which is a really important reminder that we should be very intentional and very thoughtful about what we want schools to be doing. To what extent is there a match between how children spend their time and what they're doing and the sorts of skills that we want them to acquire? So schools should be understood, my kind of take home, as cumulative cultural reproduction systems. So I want to show you a few pictures of schools around the world. The first, the top, I guess, left is Port Vila, Vanuatu, which is in the South Pacific. It's a Melanesian archipelago. Below that is a school in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo, then Quito, Ecuador, and the bottom is a school in Tel Aviv. I probably don't need to mention that these are communities and populations that vary in almost every possible way, linguistically, culturally, religiously. I could go on. These are very, very different cultures with very different histories. And yet, if you go into a school, they sure look very, very similar indeed. Our earlier presenters mentioned the sage on the stage. But it's extraordinary how similar and how continuous the reproduction system that is a school is in very, very diverse populations. There's some wonderful things about this, for sure. There are probably some drawbacks, though. So figuring out how to think about global schooling that meets the needs of 21st century global citizens, but also meets local needs, that is responsive to local demands, requirements to learn particular skills, and also how do we create flexibility in schools so that there is the ability to adapt to changing needs. So finally, I just wanted to comment on a few extraordinary opportunities. Already been mentioned, the silver lining of global disruptions, right? We have an opportunity to rethink and reimagine how we, what we need out of global schooling more generally, right? There's no need to continue the same sort of boxing, the rollout of school boxes all around the world with the same formula, the same educational message, the same sort of interactional style. We can do things differently. We should do things differently. One thing that came up in the hackathon yesterday is that to do this, most of what we need is courage, to take risks and to do something that's radically different. There are many opportunities for radical transformation. Again, thinking through how do we meet global as well as local educational needs. I see this as the core challenge of global schooling. And also just finally, I want to mention it's critical to reflect on the fact that schools add things. They add knowledge, they add skills, they add information, but they also displace other things. If you spend your time doing one thing, you're not doing another. Schools change values, identities, lots of things in ways that can be very positive, but can be negative. So taking a critical approach to the costs and benefits, the trade-offs of schooling, I think is critical. So I will end in there. Thank you.
Thanks, Christine, coming back to join us. Welcome back. That was so interesting, so many great points. And as I think about it, here we are talking about really important theoretical ideas. And on the panel is someone who gets to try and figure out what gets put into practice. So I want to take the first question with you, Shirley. You described a revolution that you're trying to engage in educationally in the Tel Aviv school system. What are you doing? And then what of these themes that you're hearing are resonating about school as a cultural transmission institution where we want to meet the personal needs of every learner in a cultural context that works for them? And it's really hard.
It's really hard.
So tell us what you're doing and what are your biggest challenges as well?
Oh, okay. So first of all, שלום לכולם. נכון בעברית יותר כיף? I have my slide. Can I have my slide behind me? Because I've prepared a slide.
Ooh, that's a good slide. I don't have a slide for me. Can you make one for us?
So take a minute to look at the slide. So Tel Aviv Yafo, maybe it's an opportunity for me to say that the city has an image of I don't know if it's the right word in English, but in Hebrew we said Babel, like bu'a. So Tel Aviv has an image to be bu'a, like a bubble, extraterritorially from the society Israel, very privileged and very white society. But the truth is, and the reality is, that Tel Aviv is not a bu'a, but it's a bavu'a, it's a reflection. It's like a mirror of all the Israeli society. And we have a very, very diverse city, and we are proud to be a very inclusive city and a very inclusive educational system. We have many religions and many cultures and many backgrounds and socioeconomical gap, and we have to adapt school system into each kind of community and each kind of identity and community. And that's why our school system is regional. It's not all over the city. Students study next to their home, okay? We don't use transportation. It's very hard in Tel Aviv, the transportation now, so good for us. But the students go by foot to the school, and schools are very communal and regional, so we built a community around school. And what we're trying to do with school principals, which are the real leaders of the educational system, we are only in the back office, but they are really the one who lead, and there are many school principals from Tel Aviv here, so what we are trying to do is start with the values of the specific community of the school. So school principal with the teachers and with the parents. One of the players that I miss here to see are the parents. We cannot talk about education without speaking with the parents and listening to the parents and studying from the parents everything they know about their children. So we start by values and about perceptions and the universal values that we want to give to the students. From this value, we go into two tracks. One track is the global knowledge, okay? We're trying to make every school to ecosystem, okay? How do we do it? We collaborate with industry, with the local grocery, with the communal center, with all the community around school, and we open school to be an ecosystem that learn from outside and bring the outside into the school. So this is the global knowledge, okay? And then the skills that the students need in this world, in this global world, technology world, rapid world. So these are the two main tracks. So up is the why do we do it? In the middle is the what we do, knowledge and skills, and down it's the how we do it. And we concentrate in 5 structures that we're trying to change in school. The ecology of school, where the students learn, not only in 4 walls, but we open classroom, we broke the walls, we go outside, we go to the roof, we go to the beach, we go to the park. This is we learned from the COVID. All the city is one big school. The curriculum, which is very restricted in Israel, it's one curriculum, same curriculum for everybody, is very centralized, so we're trying to break it. And so on. It's about the professional development of teachers. I agree very much with Professor Tamir, who said about the teachers. It begins with the teacher and the assessment. Okay, and the assessment of the students in Tel Aviv is totally different. We took out the numbers. We look at the whole of holistic way on the students, and we're trying to evaluate all the process that he's doing in his studying, in his learning, and his social and emotional skills. So everything together, we're trying to adapt schools to the global reality and not just to the history of education.
Great. I want to come. I have a follow-up question, but I want to ask a question to Joyce as well. In the U.S. and I think globally, a bunch of things happened with the pandemic. One of them is these exams that people took got harder to take. We couldn't figure out how to proctor them, how to make it work. And now we're seeing actually a movement in some places in the US away from these standardized exams at the exact same time that we see a move toward a greater need for certificates and other professional proofs of work. So how is your world shifting from the exam board perspective?
There's been a massive change. So we know that before COVID, people were very attached to this high-stakes exam. And until and unless you can be proctored and there's somebody invigilating the exam, it's very easy to cheat. Whereas during COVID, we saw a lot of new models where there was digital proctoring, but it has its own challenges. You know, what we are doing with technology is replicating the same model that we had 150 years ago. So let me give you an example. 150 years ago, we used to put examiners on boats, and they would go to different parts of the world and examine somebody who's playing music or, you know, who's performing an art form. as technology improved, we were putting the same examiner on an aeroplane instead of a boat. And now we have the same examiner on a video conference because we couldn't put them on an airplane. But the fundamental method of assessing didn't change. But what we know today is that there are technologies that can change how we assess, how we rethink how we are teaching, how we are assessing, and what we are teaching. So now with AI, you can monitor people's hand movement, eye movement, and you can get feedback at a much more real-time basis rather than waiting for a high-stakes exam. So we've been thinking about what can we do as an exam board so that it's not just a high-stakes assessment, it's actually helping you learn. It's more feedback-driven. It's also about making the teacher's life easier. And you were talking about teacher development and how technology plays a crucial role in changing the practices that exist and the culture that exists when it comes to teaching and assessment. I was in India last month where we saw this example where music learning, one of the biggest challenges is that there aren't enough high-quality trained teachers. And this organization, Furtado School of Music, they've invented a kind of technology where not only is the curriculum very structured and modularized, but also they have equipment, like you can connect up to 20 to 30 keyboards that connect to a teacher dashboard. And as the student is playing a piece on the keyboard, they have real-time feedback on where they are good, where they need to improve. So rather than doing a one-to-one learning and assessing, you've got 20 students in a class with digitally connected devices and real-time feedback. And then there's an online app or a platform where students can go home and practice as well. So the whole relationship to a teacher has changed, where you don't have to introduce the content or the topic in class, but the student can learn and the teacher can help the student excel even further. So I think the role of the teacher is going to change. The role of what is the purpose of assessment is going to change. And the other big thing is that we need to start assessing not just the technical things, the things that are easy to measure, whether it is maths or science or English or whatever it is. I think it's the human skills, the ability to empathize, the ability to work together, to collaborate, to communicate. These 21st century skills that are so crucial. Resilience. In fact, I'll tell you another story, which is from Yerukum, because yesterday we were in the desert doing a hackathon, and one of the schools, the teacher said, we've moved the school's way of teaching from a teacher-led pedagogy to a learner-driven pedagogy. So the students are leading the teaching. They decide what they want to learn, what they want to assess, how they want to do it. But the problem is, how do you measure it when 30 different kids are doing 30 different things? How do you compare? How do you see progress? And what was amazing is that in a single day of hackathon, we actually came up with a minimum viable product to say, how do we create a common language for assessment? How do we measure feedback, not just from the learner, but from teachers, from their peers, from parents, so that everyone understands how you're making progress, but also what do you need to do to improve? So lots of things are changing.
So much. By the way, how many teachers were here? Teachers or principals, anyone working in a school? How many of you feel like your job has changed significantly in the last 5 years? So most of you. Is anyone doing the same thing? Don't tell us. That's great. So the world is really changing, and there's an interesting dynamic tension that we're hearing. If I look at what you were saying, Shirley, about the global and the local approach to this student, and also Tali, you're saying, here we have all these technologies, and yet the way that we teach children and the way they learn is kind of in person and very, very, very personal. What do you see as a possibility for this world?
So I think the question really lies in your initial question to the teachers and the school principals and the leaders of the schools. The only ability that we have to change has to do with what we do in the schools. We're going to probably continue to learn in schools in various ways, and we are going to continue to learn in a very humane way. And we're going to be people learning together. And the real issue is, how do we give more authority, more professional authority to the teachers that are leading that process in the schools? How do we enable them to lead that process in the schools? What kind of knowledge and even technological abilities do we give the teachers to be able to then lead the change in the schools and really, enforce that change in the way that their students learn? And the bottom line is that we're not going to understand anything globally if we don't understand the local, if we don't understand ourselves.
I think that's so true. And Christine, let me ask you a sort of follow-up question to this, because you said something that was so resonant to me. You have people in schools and in school systems who are coming from backgrounds where there is generations of an approach to education, which may be being challenged now or maybe being continued, and others who are very new to this kind of a formal education. Children have learned always, but not in the same formal structures. So are you seeing models that are incorporating and empowering a teacher who may have those same kids in the classroom? How many of you feel like you have in one classroom students who come from a long line of learning background versus kids who are coming from anyone? It's very common in the US that there's a real divergence between the teacher's experience of education and the students, and then even amongst the students. So how do you create a common platform in the classroom that works for everyone?
I think there needs to be open dialogue between not just teachers and students, but also parents and community members to develop a common understanding about what the priorities are, what the assumptions are, because a lot of times people assume they share assumptions that they don't share, and having just an explicit discussion about ways in which there's convergence and ways in which there's divergence, about what parents are looking for to get out of schools. So one fascinating thing about working in a population where schools are very recently introduced is there's not the assumption that these are inherently useful, or that these are natural or normal or even necessarily the best way to educate children. So it's an opportunity actually to critically reflect on, wait, what are schools for? What are better ways to do it? And there's often a very functional approach to schools. What can my children learn that's useful, actionable, will improve not just their lives, but the lives of our whole family, right? In a communal sort of a way. And those kinds of discussions need to have, instead of assuming that this standard curricula is inherently useful for all.
For everyone. Figuring out the baseline between the two. You said something, Shirley, so interesting.
Let's get some questions from the audience.
Oh, we have questions from the audience?
Yes,
All right.
yes.
I had such a good one, though. No, it's okay. I'm kidding. It's okay. So let me ask this one question, and then let me go to the audience questions. And I know we're short on time, so we'll do a quick wrap out as well. The one question I wanted to ask you is, you said something that was quite different than what I hear often in America. In America, for decades, there's been a push to take kids from their communities, mix them with other kids. And now there's a pushback in some places in the US, and it sounds like you're also saying, no, let's start with the community first. Explain why that's the philosophy you're taking the approach of.
First, I believe that a child should go by foot to school, to feel part of the neighborhood, not to be dependent on the parents or transportation. Transportation means money. Not all parents have the money to give the kids to pay for the transportation, for private transportation or public transportation. So if we start with paying for transportation, we already made a gap between students that their parents can pay for transportation for better school, and parents that must stay in the neighborhood. I don't want that. There are already born gaps in Tel Aviv, Yafo, and all over the world. So what we are trying to do with the public education, and it's really there. It costs no money. Everybody gets whatever it needs, and the budget is also very differential in Tel Aviv. We invest much more in the low-income families than in the higher-income families. So I think this is the main goal of public education, which in Israel is very, very strong, the public education. I'm very proud of it. And I think this is our role as educators, to give a same chance to all students, no matter where they were born. And it's very hard in Israel and in Tel Aviv especially because the gaps are huge. So
Well,
this is
it mirrors our
our
experience
role.
in America, in large urban districts in America. It's a similar problem. There's two questions, one for Tali and one for you, Christine. Let's have you take them with your fastest answer you can. Then we're going to do a lightning round to sort of one positive and exciting thought that I'm going to have each of you share back with us about change that we can all work together to manifest.
So I just want to relate to the last question about the connection between place and the student they come from and our ability to disconnect socioeconomic status. I don't want to detach any student from his or her community. On the contrary, I think that community is what then can create the change, and that is the force for change, for learning. When I come from a family that does not have enough to transport me from one place to another, I want to enable, you said, I want to enable the community and my family to give more to everyone. That's where I come from. That is the force that I want to enhance. And that's why I talk about, start from the self, the family, the community, then go
Great.
farther.
And Christine, there's a question about storytelling maybe you can take. And then Joyce, I'm going to hand it to you for your final thought. And we'll each have a final thought from everyone.
Sure. Storytelling is a wonderful example of the need to have greater continuity between how learning and cultural transmission occurs in the world and how it occurs in schools. So the way humans remember information is through stories and through narratives. If you present information in a narrative format, we remember it better. And prior to schooling, prior to literacy, the transmission through oral traditions is how humans communicate. That's still how many humans around the planet primarily transmit information. So building in what is psychologically natural and appealing for humans and incorporating that with more formal school practices, I think that's enormously powerful and important.
Great. So the natural mode of storytelling is not PowerPoint? Joycey, what's your final thought?
So I want to leave you with something really inspiring and actionable. Trinity College London has worked with Sounds of Intent to help people with learning disabilities. We've created a framework which can be used by somebody who's in early years all the way to an adult with dementia or learning difficulties or disabilities like blindness to get an award or certificate in music. And that, I think, is really powerful because rather than saying everyone should be at the same metric, you're saying where are you and how can you progress on that journey from the beginner all the way to advanced. So do look it up. Sounds of Intent framework is absolutely free. And it's something that we've just launched in September. So really proud of the work that Trinity is doing.
Thank you, Joycey. That's great. Christine.
In terms of something, I think, actionable, as I mentioned before, we are at a point where we've been disrupted, whether we wanted it or not. It was a global experience, although absolutely experienced in different ways, in different places. And this is an ideal context to seize this disruption and rethink how we rethink business as usual, because schools operate very much business as usual in every corner of the world, and maybe they shouldn't. Maybe now is the time to implement what we know about learning sciences from decades of research, what we know about cultural diversity and how the mind works to seize the moment.
Great. Tali.
I'll relate to a movement that was created in Mindset, which is called School Unboxing. It's really a movement of teachers, of educators, of people that are interested in creating that change, and it calls for the proactive response of, proactive response doesn't work very well, right? But the proactiveness of teachers and educators in schools to find those ways of really unboxing that very closed box of surprises that really is waiting for us to open up and try out.
That's great. By the way, I'm a New Yorker. We do have proactive response. What? Shirley.
I'll follow what Ali just said. I think the main thing that that we lack in the educational system is time. There is no time. There is no time for anybody, and there is no time for teachers to imaginate and to create and to dream. And COVID has shown us that we can do much less and still have the same achievements. We can teach less disciplines, subjects. We can teach less hours per week. We can teach less students in every classroom, and the achievements are the same, and we can see more the students. We can see them better, and we can feel them better. So I wish for more time to breathe, time for imagination, time for creation, less teaching and more learning, and not only frontal learning.
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you to
Thank
all
you,
our
other
panelists.
participants. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it's the goodbye. Thank you. All right. Thank you. And thank you to all of you for the conversation. Let's do great things. And thank you to Mindset for hosting us.
Thank you.